I'll tell you something else that's kind of interesting, Jolene. The house that Chris Peterson has been remodeling behind Pioneer Lodge, that was, my dad and mother lived there when they were first married.
Is that right?
And my grandparents lived on down this way, right behind, right across the dumpsters at Red River Inn. My granddad and grandmother had a house there.
There's nothing there now. Is that right?
There's nothing there. There's a cabins in between, but there's nothing right on that spot.
What's the story of the mining company? Mrs. Reed built that, or is that?
No, that was built by my dad. Built that for my granddad and his second wife. Where JD is now,
Yeah.
that was the original Red River Inn.
Is that right?
Yeah. My dad built that for my granddaddy and his second
The lady
wife.
from Clovis, the old Monterey.
Sis Reed.
Sis Reed.
She had a Mexican restaurant there later.
When did it become home of hot biscuits?
With my granddad and his second wife. Home of fried chicken, hot biscuits.
This
And that's
lady,
what it was called?
Yeah.
Home of fried chicken?
She was related to Buster Brown somehow.
She was an honorable heifer. She really was. She had white hair like my wife, and everybody in town used to call her a little silver tip.
Silver tip.
You know, with a short tail, she was hard to get along with.
Well, in the picture that Fritz had, they had in the Miner here a couple of weeks ago of where JD's building is, and then the house on Millette where kids live,
Yeah.
and there's a lady walking across the back. That lady is Johnny's mom. They
Oh, it
lived in
is.
that house.
They lived in what house?
Where Wayne and Marcia.
Wayne and Marcia. So your parents lived in that house in Wayne and
Well, but there
Marcia.
wasn't a house there though at that time, was there? Wayne and Marshall's house wasn't there.
No,
There was
no,
a different
but
house.
it was.
Well, it's not
Yeah.
the same house.
Was it?
Wayne, of course, it was the same
duplex,
house,
wasn't it?
basically, but Wayne, of course, has
redone
made it an excellent dwelling.
Okay.
Well, and the Fallhavers did a lot of work on it.
Starbucks lived there for a while.
Yeah, and I know
I've been
Fallhavers.
down underneath Wayne's house,
I have two.
the backside there.
You can still see where it was older unit.
Pretty old structures in
Well, the
Johnny
house
said
next to them, too.
His favorite bedroom was in that house
Really?
because it had a tin roof and he was right by the creek, and then when it would rain, the
You can hear all the raindrops.
rain
Oh,
on
yeah.
the tin
I
And I
lived in a
opened the
house
window
with a
to the
tin
water.
roof as a kid. And I liked it when it rained.
When I started to tell you about that, where my grandparents lived, during the Depression, money was hard to come by.
Yeah.
The Democrats went into office, and the Republicans were the Johnsons, the T.D. Neal Mercantile, had the post office. My mother and dad decided it'd be nice if they had the post office for continual income, because there was nothing else here at that time. So they got out and went after the post office. Well, it wound up to be a big old fight between this end of town and that end of town.
But now, is that what started all this east-west division years ago?
That's probably what
Makes you
started it.
I wondered about that.
That at Bitter Creek.
Now, who had the post office? Since it was at the Johnsons, the
That was
Mercantile.
T.D. Neal
Neal's
Mercantile.
Mercantile. And then they wanted the post office.
They had the post office, and my mother and dad wanted it,
Uh-huh.
so they went after it because there was a new regime in office. The Democrats were in office. The Johnsons were Republicans. We were Democrats. And so my mother was appointed. The post office was to be moved the next day into the building behind Red River Inn, the present Red River Inn, where my granddad and grandmother had lived. That's where they were going to have the temporary office for the post office until my dad could get a building built. They got all the fish and moved them in that the day before, and we're going to pick up the papers and documents the next day in the mail. And that night, that building was blown off the face of the earth.
I've heard that before. And you
Well,
know,
that was my grandparents' building.
In
they
fact,
blew their building off of the face of the earth.
Yeah,
He's got a paper clipping of an article out of the newspaper.
just a
Now,
short
that
blurb
was
on
all
it.
by accident, of course.
Of course.
Of course.
You know what?
Very, very.
I've got a picture of some of the people we think were involved in it.
Whoa.
So what, did they ever get the post office put in someplace else?
Yeah, my parents hung in there.
Where J.D. and Renee live.
No. No, it's where Wayne Kidd is, where Wayne Kidd lives now. My mother and dad had a home there and a little store, and then the post office was there.
Oh, but then they did move it eventually to...
Well, the people up here fussed about the post office being that end of town, and they wanted more central locations, so that's when they built the building up there where JD lives now.
That became post office.
That became the post office.
So where
19
JD lives now, that became a post office.
That became the post office.
Huh.
And that was 19,
34.
no, about 37, I think, when they built that building.
That's right.
We were down at that end town for a while.
So they wanted it more centrally located. But they had already moved the fixtures and everything to your grandma's house.
Yeah, in those days, the postmaster had to furnish his own fixtures. The
Oh,
government didn't furnish them.
uh-huh.
So, the materials and the furniture and equipment that was in that building were the private property of my mother and dad. When it was blown off the face of the earth, it belonged to them, so there was no federal investigation in those days. This was before alcohol farms
Yeah.
investigations.
Greta Gallagher told me that story, and she says she knows who did it. She won't say.
We know who did it too.
Got a good idea the same day, didn't you?
You not
Pretty good.
only have a Republican into town and a Democratic into town, you also have a